Hey there guys, this is your host Richard with another marvellous video. Born Conan II, Prince Conan was one of the greatest kings that Aquilonia saw. In fact, I'm of the opinion that he was a greater king than his father, King Conan. Interestingly, these two great men battled each other nearly to death, and that's when Conan was just a young lad as yet, as was his father, the king of Aquilonia. That's exactly what we'll be exploring in this video, the battle between Conan and Conan II. The story takes place in the pages of the 2021 comic titled King Conan, Conan's last stand at the edge of the world. For the sake of background and your ease of understanding, I'll explore the first issue in detail and only focus on the Conan versus Conan arc thereafter. Let's begin, shall we? Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. On maggot-infested waves. We know it well that Conan was just 15 when he left his home in the frozen Cimmeria to fight and survive what we know as the Hyborian Age. In his travels, this black-haired, sullen-eyed, sword-wielding Cimmerian with gigantic melancholy and mirth lost much, gained more, and thrived in bloodshed, finally managing to secure the crown. So, all hail King Conan. This story of Conan and his son basically begins several years after Conan left Cimmeria. In the many years since he left Cimmeria, Conan had travelled so very far from the grim grey hills of his barbarian homeland, and he planned on travelling farther still until a storm came out of nowhere. Conan had been shipwrecked 4 times that he could remember, 5 if he counted his canoe being swallowed by a whale off the coast of Kush. He knew the tide's power to drag a man to depths from which there was no living return, and that the pounding of waves on volcanic rocks could fill his hide faster than any horde of cutlass-wielding corsairs. Conan knew the taste of the briny sea in his mouth, but he didn't recall the salt ever being quite so large. Conan had survived being marooned before, but never so far from any semblance of home. He was alone at the edge of the world, past the limits of all civilized maps. Far across the unexplored reaches of the Western Sea, he was brought to a rock of rotted doom by maggot-infested waves. It was a stony scab of an island that no soul had ever survived long enough to name. Perhaps he should have stayed on the throne, he thought, in a moment of melancholy. Which throne are we talking about? Well, the glittering king seat of Quilonia is the most magnificent of all the kingdoms of man. The throne he'd fought ferociously to gain and hold. The throne Conan had abandoned. So, Conan had been marooned, but he was clearly not the first ship to be gutted by the claws of these godforsaken shores, which meant there were weapons to be found to replace the sword he'd lost to the waves. He even found a flagon of only mildly soured rum. Well, at least he'd not have to die sober, and Conan thanked Crom for it, his god. Conan needed to build a fire before nightfall when something told him that more than just buzzards would be coming to feed. Immediately alerted, he turned around and grabbed a flying snake dagger that had been hurled at him, intending to kill him. But wait, this was not a snake dagger. He realizes that it was, in fact, a snake hurled at him as a dagger. Conan finds a cloaked figure approaching him and warns him, "Throw another snake, and I'll show you how real I am by cleaving your skull," says Conan. The Cimmerian demands to know who his attacker is, and in response, the attacker goes, "Who am I? You shall see. The world shall see. Once I claim one last trifle that the dark fates have so kindly delivered to these maggoty shores." Whoa, they really like to talk about the damned maggots. Well, it turns out that this guy was Thoth Amon, the Stygian sorcerer, and Conan's archenemy. These two men were meeting for the first time, but both had known each other. Conan had knowingly and unknowingly thwarted many of Thoth Amon's plans, and this time he was out for his revenge. Thoth Amon, that is. And come on, if someone deprives you of eternal power without even seeing your face, you'd be pissed. Thoth Amon struck his axe on Conan, blood spilled and cries were hurled, but Conan didn't really budge. All he could see in the wizard was another dead man. In this moment, however, death had drawn as near as a lover, and Conan's mind was flooded with memories of the past, memories of moments when he felt the most alive. Among these memories of adventure, fun and frolic was one that benumbed and warmed the heart of this steely survivor king, the birth of his son. Conan came from his trip down memory lane, only to realize that Thoth Amon was nothing like the enemies he'd faced in the past. This guy was powerful and extremely skilled at his craft, sorcery. He showed Conan the feats of savagery, the likes of which hadn't been dreamed of by mortal men. But Thoth Amon had also never faced an adversary like Conan. The Cimmerian and the Stygian fought tooth and nail, only for Conan to plunge them both into the frigid sea, which started to boil because of the Stygian sorcery. In the sea, the sorcerer needed his lungs more than his powers, and now, without his witching powers, he was just like another man, and Conan the Cimmerian realized this. Soon, a shark bit off Thoth Amon's wrist, and suddenly the shark, Conan and Thoth Amon plunged out of the water and onto the land. You see, the sorcerer's blood was mixed with ancient magic. The sorcerer then summoned the serpent men from their Lemurian tombs. He called forth the red apes from the lava hills or Kitai, and the polar tigers from the woods of Hyperborea. One of the tigers charged at Conan, and although reluctantly, the barbarian had to slaughter the tiger in self-defense. Clearly, the sorcerer had no regard or respect for life. But Conan was determined to teach Thothomon the power of death. But why did Thothomon come to fight Conan? Well, in order to finish what he started. In order to become the ruler of all mankind, Thothomon wanted the blood of a king. But strangely, he found his spell waning. Well, Conan explains that he's not a king anymore. We go into a flashback. A few years ago, he gave the kingship to his son, Conan. And now that Thothomon was weakened, Conan raised his king's sword for the killing blow, and the sun sank beneath the sea like a drowning man who had gasped his last. And night came to the island with a shudder from somewhere deep. He struck Thothomon in the belly, but the cliff broke apart, and both of them plunged into the sea again. But wait, something was happening. As the island's entrails were laid bare, Conan paid no heed to the mass grave of wreckage around him. There were scores of ruined ships from all corners of the world, some of which were centuries old. All were still scattered with the mouldering remains of their doomed crews. The barbarian only had eyes for his own red-hot murderous rage. Soon, the corpses began to rise. Conan thought it was Thothomon's doing, but the ring that gave him power had abandoned him long ago. The island had a rage of its own, a rage that rose when the sun hid its face in the deep, a rage that only the moon dared look upon. And that's where the first issue of this magnificent comic ends. A barbarian father's lament. The Cimmerian didn't roar threats, make bold proclamations of his prowess, or entrust the gods for divine interventions. Instead, as the horde of the undead swarmed around him, hissing and howling and hungering for his flesh, Conan let his sword do the talking. Also, Thothomon joined the fray, for they had a common enemy. Conan and Thothomon both knew that defeating all the reanimated corpses was not possible. Conan pushed Thothomon down below so that the zombie pirates would devour him, buying himself a window of opportunity. Once again, we're sent into a flashback. Conan loved his violence. He loved the thrill of a fight and everything else that came with it. After becoming the king of Aquilonia, he brought peace and prosperity to the kingdom. In fact, he brought a bit too much peace. So much so that he didn't have anyone left to fight. Without any bones to break, blood to spill, or battles to win, Conan grew restless and unhappy with his life. He believed that peace was nothing more than dying men whimpering on deathbeds or little children oblivious to the battles fought to keep them safe. Once, a few rebel raiders from the state of Zingaria attacked Aquilonia. Although the raiders were pushed back beyond the Aquilonian border, Conan was not content. He wanted to keep going into Zingaria, which would amount to an invasion. Because Conan wasn't listening to any of his generals and advisors, they approached Prince Conan in the hope that he took some sense into the barbarian king. So, Prince Conan went to his father, telling him that the invaders had been pushed and the borders had been secured. But King Conan was not in a mood to get lectured by the fruit of his loins. But Conan succeeded in making Conan let go of the Zingarian course. So, Conan suggested they crush the brigands of the Iberian mountains, another skirmish that had been resorted by Conan a week prior. Next, Conan wanted to go to the west, where the Picts were burning villages, but Conan had taken care of it by asking the magistrate to hand over the abductor of a Pict maiden to the Picts for jungle justice. Conan was so desperate for a good fight that he suggested going to a tavern and insulting the mothers of the patrons. Can you imagine? The king wanted to insult the mothers of his subjects to pick up a fight. But Conan sees through his father and says, no one ever said it was easy being a king or getting old. Conan was actually disappointed with the peace he'd brought, and that too at a time when every other kingdom was ruled by a war-hungry would-be world conqueror. However, what concerned him more was Conan's approach toward things. Conan believed that although Conan had been trained by the most learned men in all of Aquilonia, their knowledge came from scrolls, while Conan, on the other hand, Conan learned of these foreign lands, beasts, and all kinds of evil creatures firsthand. The man had tested himself in every way imaginable, in every land known to man, and in some long since forgotten. He'd lived life in all the most gloriously uncivilized ways a man possibly could. Conan pretty much thought that he did all this so that his son could spend his life inside a castle surrounded by an army of guards. By succeeding as king, he feared that he had failed as a father, in the sense that he couldn't provide the skills his son needed. Prince Conan had never known the feeling of leaving the only home he ever had, and with nothing but his own wits and steel to carve his way through a world, he knew nothing about it. He wanted Prince Conan to live the same way he did, by waking up in a strange land with no idea how to feed himself while facing the terrors the night might bring. Conan thought to himself that Prince Conan was destined to be a king someday, but what kind of king would Conan make if he never spent his life outside the safety of the castle? So there was only one thing left to do, but he knew well that the boy would not like this move. A few days later, Conan and Prince Conan rode to the Aquilonian border. Conan didn't reveal why he dragged the child so far away from his home. Naturally, Prince Conan was concerned concerned about the same, but more concerning than this was Conan's brooding, which was at an all-time high. When Prince Conan finally asked why they were there, Conan simply said, "So we could say goodbye." Prince Conan thought that Conan was going away, probably to start another war, but no, Conan was not going anywhere. Prince Conan was. Adding to it, Conan was like whatever Prince Conan had on him at that moment. For instance, his clothes and weapons were all that Prince Conan was gonna take with him, and he wasn't to return until he had a tale from every land on the map. He was effectively being exiled from Aquilonia. Of course, Prince Conan was quick to remind his old man that he'd lost his damned mind. Respectfully, though, Prince Conan couldn't believe what he was hearing and demanded that his father know the reason for this exile. Now, Prince Conan already knew whatever was going on in Conan's mind, but he just wanted to hear it all from the horse's mouth. He pleaded with his father to at least talk about it. He wanted to reason with his old man. But Conan, being Conan, said, "Conan too, son of Zenobia, Prince of Aquilonia, your king has just given you an order." And with these words, Conan drew his sword. Needless to say, being his father's son, Prince Conan was quick to draw as well. Now, this was a big deal, you see. The young lad had drawn his sword in defiance of an order of the king and against the king himself. Father versus son. King versus prince. Conan versus Conan. Prince Conan tells his father that he knew everything. How Conan thought that growing up in the mightiest kingdom and protected by the most able people must have made Prince Conan a weakling. He wanted to talk to Conan, but the barbarian king's tremendous ego had been hurt by his son and his unsheathed sword. Conan declared that the time for talk had passed and charged his son. However, Prince Conan was not afraid to fight Conan any longer. Well, to be honest, it wasn't the first time that Prince Conan was fighting Conan. Since he was old enough to stand upright, Conan handed a sword into the boy's hand and trained him personally. But this time was a bit different. If Prince Conan fell, he would remain so. No one would come to his aid. There were no servants to solve his scratches and wounds. Quite obviously, Conan managed to disarm his son and scare his horse away, leaving him without a sword and a ride. However, Prince Conan had learned from his father that a good sword is like a fine horse. The man who treats him with care will outlive the fool who does not. So, Prince Conan started taking good care of his sword and swordsmanship, but went one step ahead and worked the stables. He was very well accustomed to Conan's horse, Regalian. While Conan left his son to lick his wounds, the young prince ordered Regalian to stand tall, which threw Conan off his horse. Angered, Conan charged at his son once again. In all the years, all the countless battles that Conan had fought, no blade had ever felt so dreadfully heavy in Conan's hand. With every swing, the steel grew heavier and cut deeper as King Conan carved his own heart into pieces. He struck his son, kicked him and knocked him down. With a strike from his knee, Conan made his son's mouth bloody before unknowingly throwing Prince Conan into a huge bush of thorns. The father's heart melted at this as he searched desperately for his son. However, Prince Conan didn't need any help. Contrary to what Conan believed, Prince Conan was way more prepared to be the king than anyone else in the entire kingdom. You see, he was forged by fire, which even Conan didn't endure. The fire of having Conan as a father. The two of them engaged in battle once again. In all of Conan's fights against frost giants, hordes of crazed Cossacks, snake men and apes with wings, and even Crom on his mountain, this was the toughest, most hard-bitten, most gut-wrenching battle he'd ever engaged in. And of course, he'd say this with a small measure of pride. Nevertheless, the fight was far from over. Once again, Prince Conan is down, and Conan tells his son that he must learn on his own. He must learn to fight and survive. But Prince Conan rebuttals him, asking, "What do you know of what I've learned?" While their swords are still clashing and thundering, Prince Conan begins telling Conan of the things he knows about their land, such as how there are 982 miles of aqueducts stretching across the country. In fact, he could draw a map if Conan asked. He knew exactly what it took for the capital city to survive the winter, for he'd filled the granaries with his own shovel and salt-cured the beef. He rolled casks of ale without ever spilling or drinking a drop. He knew the screams of rats that echoed when Conan torched their nests to save the people from the plague. He knew the wails of the dying leper and the peace in their eyes when the pain finally stopped at the edge of Prince Conan's sword. He knew about the 17 prisoners in Aquilonian jails who should be pardoned, the 9 governors Conan should never turn his back on, and the 8 foreign leaders actively plotting invasion. He talks about the 37 soldiers killed in the last campaign and how 28 of them had children. But most importantly, Prince Conan knew that all these things kept Conan awake at night. He praises his father and acknowledges that the world will not see another man like Conan in all the eons to come. He goes on to say, "I know you didn't want that throne so you could grow old and die inside a castle. And even if Conan tried to do something like that, he would destroy himself and all of Aquilonia, something his enemies could never achieve with all their forces combined." Prince Conan was now taking charge. charge of himself, his sword, the situation, as well as his magnificent father. With one of the finest swings of a sword Conan had ever witnessed, Prince Conan disarmed his father and knocked him down. Conan was down on the ground, defeated, but surprised, happily surprised. Prince Conan tells him, "You were born to chase the wind, Conan of Cimmeria, while I was born the son of the world's greatest king, born to fight and die for this land. That's all I've ever known. That's why I'm not leaving Aquilonia, father. You are." So yes, Prince Conan had turned the tide of the battle and transformed his life along with his father's. Conan simply asked, "When did you become such a man?" A question he did not need an answer to. He got up on his feet and hugged his son and king. Of course, I didn't explore everything that was happening in the story because that's a story for another time, another channel. Oh yes, we'll soon be exploring all 6 issues of the miniseries in great detail on our new comic-oriented long-form channel called Marvelous Long Reads. So, don't forget to subscribe to it.